There's a kind of pain that never finds words. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand. It doesn't even explain itself. It just lives. Quietly. Inside the body. Inside the sighs. Inside the distance. And over time, that silence, if left unspoken, becomes a language of its own. A language our children begin to understand without us ever teaching it. Not with words, but with absence. With tone. With the subtle way we pull back. With the invisible walls we build, even while saying, "I'm fine." This is how emotional pain travels. Not through trauma alone, but through what remains unspoken after the trauma ends. You may think you're hiding it well. The disappointment, the grief, the unresolved shame, the pain that hardened into silence years ago. You don't talk about it. You don't want to burden anyone. You try to stay strong, present, reliable. But children, especially our children, are not listening to our words. They are reading our energy. They feel the tension in your silence. They sense the weight behind your smile. They notice when your eyes go distant, even if your mouth is laughing. And when you never speak your truth, they learn to stop asking questions. Not because they don't care, but because they feel that certain rooms inside you are locked and they were never given a key. Carl Jung wrote that nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. That unlived life doesn't just mean dreams we gave up. It means emotions we never processed. It means stories we never told. It means tears we never allowed to fall. It means truths we never gave ourselves permission to speak. And what is left unsaid doesn't vanish. It settles. It waits. And it shows up in how we react, how we withdraw, how we hold back. We think we're protecting our children by staying quiet. But silence isn't neutral. Silence is interpreted. And often, it's interpreted as distance. They don't know what you've been through. They don't know the battles you fought in your own childhood. They don't know how hard you've worked to keep it all together. All they feel is the coldness that settles between you, not from hatred, but from history. So many parents live behind this shield. "I'm fine. It's not important now." They wouldn't understand. It's in the past. But children, even adult children, sense the emotional contradiction. You say you're okay, but you flinch at certain topics. You change the subject quickly. You close off without warning. You don't cry, ever. Or you cry when you think no one is looking. This creates confusion. And in the absence of answers, children fill in the blanks. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe they don't trust me. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe I'll just stop trying. That's how distance begins, not with a dramatic event, but with 1,000 subtle disconnections. Jung believed that what is not made conscious will be lived out as fate. If we do not face our own shadows, they do not disappear. They become the unconscious inheritance of our children. That means the anger you never processed may resurface in their relationships. The self-betrayal you normalized may become the pattern they repeat in adulthood. The grief you buried may echo through their inability to open up emotionally. And they won't know why. They'll just feel it. They will carry what you never put down. And they'll call it normal. Until one day they realize they've built lives that look like yours, not out of choice, but out of unresolved emotional inheritance. Why don't we speak? Because deep down we are terrified. Terrified that if we open the door, everything we've worked so hard to hold together will fall apart. We're afraid to cry because we don't know if we'll stop. Afraid to speak because we don't trust the words. Afraid to feel because we've learned to survive without it. And yet, that fear has a cost. It costs us closeness. It costs us authenticity. It costs us moments with our children that could have been real, but remain scripted. You think, "I'd rather keep the peace than make it uncomfortable." But what if the peace you're protecting is the very thing keeping love from growing deeper? Sometimes we say, "I don't want to burden my kids." But what we really mean is, "I don't want to feel that again." We don't want to reopen the wound. We don't want to remember how deep it went. We don't want to admit that part of us is still bleeding. So we protect the pain. We defend the silence. We wrap ourselves in emotional distance and call it strength. But your children don't need your strength. They need your truth. Not all at once. Not in dramatic confessions, but in small, honest openings. A moment of softness. A sentence that wasn't filtered. A memory spoken without shame. A story told, not to be solved, but to be shared. That's how the distance begins to close. Not through fixing. Through feeling. You don't have to explain your whole past. You don't have to justify your silence. You don't even need to have all the answers. You only need to begin. Begin by naming something real, by feeling something fully, by trusting that the child in front of you, even if they're an adult, can handle your humanity. You are not just a role. You are not just the provider, the caretaker, the example. You are a person, a soul with history, a story still being written. Let them meet you there. Let them see that the distance they felt was never about rejection. It was about pain. And pain, when spoken with courage, can become connection. If this message opened something inside you, if it reminded you of a silence you've carried for too long, if it made you think of your own parents or your children, then maybe it's time to speak, to soften, to release the performance of "I'm fine," and start reclaiming your voice. Leave a like if you felt seen here. Not for metrics, but as a sign that your silence deserves to become something more. Subscribe if you're ready to explore these spaces, where healing begins and the legacy of distance ends. The silence stops with you. And from here forward, something truer can begin. They don't always inherit your memories. They inherit your energy, your silence, your unprocessed grief, your patterns of avoidance, your tone when you say it's nothing, your reactions when no one's watching. Children grow up absorbing not only what you say, but what you never say. They take in the unshed tears, the unfinished sentences, the discomfort you never address. They learn to flinch when you flinch, to withdraw when you go quiet, to carry what you didn't realize you were handing them. Because what we don't resolve doesn't just disappear. It transfers. And the most dangerous part? No one notices until years later. You think you're protecting them, but what you're really doing is passing it on. You see, we don't just inherit eye color or height. We inherit emotional blueprints. If you've lived most of your life hiding your needs, your child may become an adult who apologizes for having any. If you've pushed down anger your whole life, your child might become someone who feels unsafe around their own emotions. If you've lived your life saying yes when you meant no, they may become people who say yes to everyone except themselves. This is the quiet inheritance, not made of money or property, but of patterns. Invisible, unspoken, and deeply rooted. There is a part of you that wanted to be strong for them, to never show weakness, to keep everything running, to always smile, always provide, always show up. But in doing so, you may have taught them that strength means silence, that love means overextending, that survival means pretending, that they, too, should hide what hurts. That's the legacy most parents never mean to leave. But unless we become conscious of it, we do. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And it's true for families. Your unconscious life becomes your child's environment. Your emotional temperature becomes their weather. And they grow up never questioning it, because it was the air they breathed. But now that you see it, you can shift it, not with grand gestures, but with small truths. Start by noticing when your child or grandchild reacts like you used to. Noticing when they apologize for having needs. Noticing when they shut down because they learned early that certain emotions weren't safe. And ask yourself, did they learn that from me? This isn't about blame. It's about awareness. You did the best you could, and your best got them here. But your best was also shaped by your own inheritance, from your parents and theirs. And now, someone has to break the cycle. That someone might be you. It doesn't mean becoming perfect. It means becoming present. So when your child expresses frustration, you don't shut it down. You don't call it disrespect. You listen. You breathe. You notice the reaction in your body, and you choose something different. You soften instead of snapping. You stay instead of storming out. You speak, even if your voice shakes. That moment is a break in the cycle. A tiny act of rebellion against a silence that's been passed down like furniture. And it's powerful, because what your children need isn't a perfect parent. They need a human one. One who can say, I used to hide this too. I'm still learning. I was never taught how to talk about these things, but I want to try. Those sentences, they're sacred. They make room for connection. And they teach your children that healing is possible, even late. Especially late. Because children don't only need answers. They need models. They need to see someone choosing wholeness over performance. Someone showing them that emotional inheritance isn't destiny, it's just a starting point. And they can change the rest. Maybe you don't know where to start. Start by admitting that you were hurt, too. That no one taught you how to handle sadness. That you were never allowed to be vulnerable. That you learned to protect yourself by staying silent. Say those things. Not to be dramatic. Not to impress. But to connect. So they can look at you and say, "Me too." So that's why. I thought it was just me. And in that moment you break something. Not in a harmful way. In a liberating one. You break the idea that love must be quiet. You break the belief that parents must always appear whole. You break the false safety of pretending. And what rises in its place is honesty, closeness, peace. The kind that doesn't come from pretending everything is fine, but from telling the truth and being loved anyway. You don't need to rewrite the past. You just need to stop repeating it. Your children will understand more than you think. They're carrying what you've carried, whether they realize it or not. Let them hear where it came from. Let them see where it ends. With you. If this message helped you recognize something in yourself or in your family, leave a like, not for recognition, but as a quiet step toward breaking the pattern. Subscribe if you're ready to keep walking this path toward truth, connection, and healing that travels forward. You inherited pain, but now you're choosing to pass down something else. There's a moment in life, often after decades of holding it all together, when you realize something profound. Telling the truth about how you feel still scares you. You could be wise, experienced, capable, and still feel like your feelings are too loud, too much, too heavy, or too dangerous. Not because they are, but because that's how you were taught to see them. You were taught that silence keeps the peace. That smiling is stronger than crying. That composure matters more than truth. And so you became someone who could hold everything, except your own vulnerability. You learned to be a parent, a partner, a provider, but not a person who speaks what hurts when it still hurts. Now, years later, the silence feels normal, but your body knows the cost. It shows up in the tightness in your chest when you're misunderstood, in the fatigue you feel after pretending for too long, in the way your voice hesitates when you're about to say something real. You want to be honest. You want to let someone in, but something inside whispers, "What if it makes things worse? What if they don't understand? What if I open up and it changes nothing?" That's what emotional honesty feels like after a lifetime of protecting everyone else. Risky. Because speaking your truth isn't just about words. It's about breaking the pattern you were raised in. It's about confronting the silence you've passed down. It's about finally facing the fear that being real will cost you love. You grew up thinking that love meant hiding what you really felt, so you could keep the room calm, so no one would leave, so everyone else would stay okay. And maybe that worked for a while. But now, when your child looks at you and says, "You're hard to reach," you don't know how to respond, because you were never taught how to be reachable. You were taught how to survive, how to be useful, how to be safe. But safe doesn't mean close. Safe doesn't mean known. And love without emotional honesty is just performance. You don't have to tell everything. You don't have to explain it all. But you do have to stop pretending that you're okay when you're not. Because pretending builds walls. And emotional honesty, even in small, quiet moments, opens a door. Maybe you've tried before and got shut down. Maybe someone dismissed your feelings. Maybe they used your honesty against you. So you shut it off. That was protection. And it worked. But now you're in a new chapter. And you don't want protection anymore, you want connection. Connection doesn't require you to be perfect. It just asks you to be present. To say what's true. Even if your voice shakes. Even if they don't respond the way you hope. Even if it's messy. You might say, "I'm not sure how to talk about this, but I want to try." Or, "There's something I've been carrying for years, and I think it's time I put it down." Or even, "Sometimes I feel far away, and I don't want to anymore." Those aren't dramatic words. They're brave ones. They're the beginning of healing. They let your children see you, not just as the role you've played, but as the human you are. And when they see you more clearly, they begin to trust that they can be seen too. Honesty is contagious. So is silence. You get to choose what travels through your family next. If you don't know where to begin, begin here. Speak when you usually stay quiet. Pause when you usually defend. Share when you usually protect. And trust that your truth, even if it's uncomfortable, is worth hearing. Even if it's messy, it's real. And real is where love finally breathes again. You don't have to open everything at once. Start small. Start soft. But start. Because the moment you do, you give your children something more valuable than answers. You give them permission. Permission to stop performing. Permission to stop guessing how you feel. Permission to live a life where emotions aren't dangerous, they're welcome. You've survived by staying quiet. But now, maybe it's time to live by telling the truth. If this message resonated with you, if it reminded you of something you've held back too long, leave a like, not to be noticed, but as a signal to yourself that you're done hiding. And if you're ready to keep walking toward honesty, connection, and peace, subscribe. You don't have to keep it all in anymore. Someone is ready to hear you. Start with you. You've waited long enough for them to notice, for them to understand, for someone to say, you matter too. But they didn't, or they couldn't, or maybe they did once and then forgot. So you stayed quiet. You waited. You told yourself that healing would come when they apologized, when they softened, when they finally saw you. But healing doesn't work that way. Healing doesn't ask for their permission. It asks for your presence. It doesn't begin when others understand your pain. It begins when you stop waiting for them to. You're allowed to get better without closure. You're allowed to move forward without applause. You're allowed to rebuild yourself without their blessing. That moment when you realize you don't need them to get it in order to let go, that's when the work truly begins. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. Sometimes invisible. But it's real. And it starts here. With you. You've spent years holding your breath. Walking on eggshells. Bracing for disappointment. You've tried to be soft so they wouldn't break. You've tried to be strong so no one would worry. You've tried to be useful, patient, kind, even when you were tired of being the only one trying. And somewhere along the way, you disappeared. Not in a loud way, but in all the small ways. You stopped saying what you wanted. You stopped asking for what you needed. You stopped expecting to be met. And the worst part, no one noticed. That kind of quiet erasure doesn't happen overnight. It happens over years. One small silence at a time. Until suddenly you realize they don't even see you anymore. Not because you vanished, but because you stopped showing up as yourself. You showed up as what they could handle. As what made them feel safe. As the version of you that was easiest to love. But now, that version feels heavy. It doesn't fit. It doesn't breathe. It doesn't feel like you anymore. And that means something sacred is happening. You're beginning to remember yourself. Not the self they know. The one you buried beneath years of being fine. The one who used to laugh louder. Feel deeper. Speak more honestly. Live more freely. That version never died. It just got tired of not being chosen. Now it's your turn to choose it. You don't need a perfect moment. You don't need everyone on board. You don't need anyone else to catch up. You just need to begin. Begin by noticing when you shrink. When you say yes out of guilt. When you tolerate what drains you. When you silence what matters. And then choose differently. Even in the smallest way. Say no, kindly but firmly. Step back, without explaining. Rest, without earning it first. Speak, even if your voice is quiet. Not to prove anything, but to remind yourself you're allowed to exist fully. You've always been allowed. You just forgot. Because somewhere along the way, someone taught you that your worth was tied to your usefulness. That being needed mattered more than being known. That you had to be helpful to be loved. But love doesn't require performance. Real love says, you as you are enough. And if no one has said that to you lately, say it now. To yourself. Out loud. As often as it takes. Because your nervous system is still wired for survival. It still flinches at closeness. It still tenses around conflict. It still expects rejection, even when none is coming. That's not weakness. That's memory. But now that you know, you can teach your body a new way to live. A way that says, I'm allowed to be here. I'm allowed to take up space. I'm allowed to feel deeply and still be safe. You're not too much. You've just been holding too much for too long. It's time to put some of it down. Not all at once, but a little at a time. Let go of the need to fix everything. Let go of the pressure to be understood. Let go of the hope that they'll one day say all the right things. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. But either way, you're still allowed to heal. Because healing isn't about rewriting the past. It's about changing your relationship with the present. It's about showing up for yourself in ways no one ever showed up for you. It's about becoming the parent, the partner, the protector you always needed for yourself. And when you do that, you begin to break the cycle. The cycle of emotional abandonment, of guilt-driven love, of invisible pain passed down like inheritance. It stops here. With you. You don't have to scream it. You don't have to post about it. You don't need a breakthrough moment. Just a choice. To live as yourself without apology. To honor the voice that says, this matters. To trust that healing doesn't need witnesses, only willingness. And if you're waiting for a sign, this is it. You've spent enough time on the edge of yourself. Now it's time to come home. If these words met you where no one else has, leave a like, not for validation, but as a quiet promise to yourself that you're ready to begin again. Subscribe if you're walking this path too, where healing happens in quiet ways, and where presence becomes the only permission you'll ever need. You're not broken. You're becoming. And that is sacred. If this message spoke to something you've carried in silence, if you felt seen in a way that words rarely allow, leave a like, not for numbers, but as a quiet sign to yourself. You're ready to stop shrinking. And if you want to keep walking this path, where truth is honored and healing is never rushed, subscribe. We're building something gentle here, and there's space for you.